We were all getting excited about the holidays when someone suggested we hold a party one lunchtime before we broke up. One of the staff, an ex-boxer named Arthur Ballard, a tough but excellent teacher, gave us permission to use his room, provided he could come too. We happily agreed, found a record player, and chipped in for the beers. The day of the party was warm, and the sun streamed through the grubby windows of Arthur Ballard's first-floor room, where we gathered once a week to produce paintings on a chosen theme. We pushed the tables and chairs to one side, set out the food and drink, and put on a pile of records. The usual gang were there, a group of 10 or 15 of us who'd been friends since our first year. I arrived feeling good. I was wearing a new baggy black cotton top over a short black and white skirt, with black tights and my best black winkle-picker shoes. By now, several romances were budding, so the atmosphere was heady. Anne Mason was getting together with Jeff Mohammed, close friend of John's. They smooched away. Phil and I glanced knowingly at each other. Then John walked in. My face was hot and my stomach contorted as I pretended not to notice him. Like me, he was in black, his usual drainpipe trousers with a sweater and suede shoes. He made a beeline for me and said, "Do you want to get up?" I blushed, but leapt to my feet to dance with him. While we were dancing to Chuck Berry, John shouted, "Do you fancy going out with me?" I was so flustered that I came out with, "I'm sorry, but I'm engaged to this fellow in Hoylake." The moment I said it, I wanted the ground to swallow me up. I knew I sounded stuck up and prim. "I didn't ask you to fucking marry me, did I?" John shot back. He walked off, and, convinced I'd blown it, I was plunged into gloom. But a couple of hours later, as the party was breaking up, John and his friends asked me and Phil to the pub. This was good news. Perhaps all was not lost. I persuaded Phil we should go, and we followed them to Ye Crack, a pub where the students often hung out. The place was packed, and we had to yell to each other above the hubbub. We'd never been there before. We'd always headed straight home like the good girls that we were. And this was our first taste of student social life. We loved the noise, the laughter, and the buzzy atmosphere, and realised what we'd been missing. John was with a couple of his cronies, Jeff Mohammed and Tony Carricker, on the other side of the pub, and made no move to come over to us. Phil and I had found some friends and were chatting with them, but after a couple of black velvets, the mix of Guinness and cider that all the students drank, I felt a little wobbly and decided I'd better head for my train home. I was disappointed that John hadn't talked to me, and wondered if, after all, he'd been laughing at me when he'd invited me to the pub. As I made for the door, he called me over, teased me about being a nun, and asked me to stay. Phil said she had to get her bus home and asked if I was coming. I knew she didn't approve of John, but I was hooked. If he wanted me to stay, I was staying. I smiled apologetically at her. She gave a helpless shrug and headed for the door. John and I had another couple of drinks, and then he whispered, "Let's go." The two of us slipped away from the crowd. By this time it was evening, and the street outside was quiet. Almost as soon as we left the pub, John kissed me, a long, passionate, irresistible kiss. He whispered that his friend Stuart had a room we could go to, grabbed my hand, and pulled me down the road. I was happy, hugely happy to be with John, and that he felt the same. At that moment I would have gone anywhere with him. Stuart's place was a large room at the back of a shared house, with no curtains, a mattress on the floor, and clothes, art materials, empty cigarette packets, and books scattered around it. We couldn't have cared less about the mess, and headed for the mattress, where we made love for the next hour. Afterward, John said, "Christ, Miss Powell, that was something else. What's all this about being engaged, then?" I told him that, in fact, I'd just broken off with a boy in Hoylake, and my romance was over. John grinned and said he thought I was incredibly sexy and he'd been lusting after me all term. "By the way," he added, "no more Miss Powell. From now on, you're Sin." We snapped back to reality when I realised I was about to miss my last train home. We pulled on our clothes and raced to the station, where we managed a hasty goodbye kiss before I leapt into a carriage. "What are you doing tomorrow, and the next day, and the next?" John called, as I waved out of the window. "Seeing you," I shouted back.